It is January 10th, and it is time to talk about my TBR spin for November of 2024. So the prompt for November was to read a book off your stack that gave you male Oxbridge student studying in the 1940s vibes. That's kind of a lot, but it was a super fun prompt and I had a fun time picking it, and I picked Decline and Fall by Evelyn Waugh. This is Evelyn Waugh's first novel. I've read several Evelyn Waugh books so far, including his most well-known Brideshead Revisited, which also talks about a student at Oxbridge or Oxford and Cambridge. I believe that in Brideshead Revisited it is Oxford, and I think it's Oxford in this as well. But so when I made the decision to pick this book last vlog, I vlog all my TBR Spin books, I was really excited about it, so I decided I wanted to pick it up right away. If you're unfamiliar with the TBR Spin, it is a super fun booktube game where you pick 12 books at the start of the year, and then freshly read books spins a wheel. The prompts on that wheel lead you to pick a book off of your stack. So the prompts change. Sometimes you have to swap out a book. Sometimes the proper book isn't in your stack. Sometimes you have to pick a new one. Sometimes you have to get rid of one. It's all super fun. So in January we had 12 books. The wheel was spun. We pick a book, we read it, and then in February we have 11 books, etc., etc. And this is really a game to bust your TBR. So it's a way to pick books off of your TBR, like using prompts to find books. So I consistently like to pick books off my TBR that I want to get to that I haven't gotten to in a while. Or for instance, in 2024, I put a ton of short story collections on my TBR Spin because I wanted to read more short story collections, and I vlog all the books for my TBR Spin. Usually I only do one book per vlog, and I talk about that book a little bit more in depth. In 2024, I got really far behind on my TBR Spin reading, obviously, because it is now 2025 and I'm still reading for 2024. That seemed to happen with a lot of people, and even Jill from the Book Billy is not going to be doing the spin anymore this year. She did do the first 2 years. So in 2025, only Sarah is going to be doing the spin, and she talks about how she was behind in her spin reading as well, and how she's doing the spin a little differently. So in 2025, there are going to be live shows preceding the end of each month where they do the spin and then have some reading sprints so that you can either catch up on your last book or you can start your new book and get on track, which I think is a really great idea. I don't know if I will be participating in the TBR Spin in that way. I might just keep doing it the way that I've done it, which is to watch the spin, pick the book, then read it for you in a vlog, and then watch the next spin at the end of that vlog. Like I said, in November I picked Decline and Fall, and I picked this one because it is partially set at Oxford or Oxbridge. I'm not sure if it's Oxford or Cambridge. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it's Oxford. And I was super excited to read it, and I ended up actually reading this entire book before even starting this vlog. It's very short. It's under 300 pages, and the margins are huge, and the text is big, and I ended up reading this one on audio, so it went super quickly. It was only like a 7 or 8 hour audiobook. Decline and Fall follows Paul, who is studying to be chaplain or a priest or a vicar of some variety. I don't know what the difference is. I'm not up on my Christian religions, my Catholic and Christian religions at Oxford. And on one wild night at Oxford, he ends up stripping down and he ends up being sent down from the college, so let go of the college, expelled from the college for like indecent exposure, essentially. The way that Evelyn Waugh, even in Brideshead Revisited, depicts Oxford and these very buttoned up, straight-laced students who have to be very professional and very, what's the word, like respectable in regular life, is that they are wild and crazy during their Oxford years, that they get into all sorts of shenanigans. And the way that Paul is described in this is that he's kind of just like a mild-mannered guy who wants to, study the seminary, but he gets wrapped up in this debauchery of students. He's not one of the richer students. His parents have died and he's he's left an inheritance, which his uncle commands until he turns like 21 or whatever it is and gets his full inheritance. So when he's sent down, the uncle tells him that he's not going to pay for his schooling anymore, that he'd better get a job, and that basically he's not going to get his inheritance for one reason or another. Although Paul thinks that he's still going to get it when he turns 21, or he hopes he does at least. That kind of leads us off on a whole satirical, over-the-top downfall of Paul and how he has to scrape by. He ends up having bad situation after bad situation happen to him, or at least they are not what he expected. And even in this book, we're told that Paul is a person who just kind of goes along with life, who's not creating the momentum for life. He's just getting swept along by the river of life. And that river leads him to some very uncomfortable situations, some weird situations, some good situations, but mostly like a decline and fall of his life since he was expelled from school. So we see Paul going to a boys' school and becoming a teacher, but this is not like a respected or good boys' school. He is expected to teach classes that he doesn't know. He's expected to teach the organ, which he doesn't know how to play. He's expected to do things that he doesn't really understand. And Paul is a person who is swept away by life, so he just gleans information from the people around him. And for some reason, people have a habit of talking to Paul about like their life story, even though he like doesn't want to hear it. So it's very, very funny. It's very satirical. It's very silly, very over the top parody of British life. Parody is the word I was thinking of before. Just a romp. And that is how one of the other books that I read by Evelyn Waugh, The Loved One, was as well. Ridiculous scenarios, people faking their own death more than once, people dying, people disguising themselves, getting into trouble, falling in love, all sorts of crazy debauchery and ridiculous encounters and endeavors that Paul undergoes. So I definitely recommend this one. It is heavily British, so you have to have some English or British sensibility or some idea of their sensibilities, some idea of their humor, because I think most people would consider this like gibberish if you don't know anything about British society, if you don't know anything about British customs, if you don't know anything about like English life at this time. This book was written in, I believe, the 1920s. Yes, 1928. And Waugh's stories often have to do with the late 1800s and early 1900s, from what I've read. Whereas Brideshead Revisited is a much more serious novel in some places, and where it has more serious undertones of love and society and all that stuff, this one is like silly to the extreme, to the full effect, you know. But I really had so much fun reading it, and like I said, I just couldn't put it down. It was so silly. It made me laugh out loud a couple times. It was totally ridiculous. It's right up my alley as far as humor and comedic elements, which I just love the absurd and the ridiculous and the parody of what people would mostly consider like serious things. So this one I definitely would recommend. So now the vlog could be over. It wasn't much of a vlog, was it? But what we will do is we will pick the December book. We will watch the December spin, which is Jill's last spin, and we will pick our December book. In a way, that works out great because I can catch up a little bit more on my TBR Spin 2024, and I can start my TBR Spin 2025. So the last book on my TBR Spin list for 2024 is How to Love a Jamaican by Alexa Arthurs, and this is a collection of short stories. This book has been on my spin list all year, so I'm kind of hoping to get to it, but I don't know what the final spin is. So let's watch Jill's video and find out. We're back, and the spin was not kind to How to Love a Jamaican, unfortunately, because it is a classic you're embarrassed not to have read yet. So I will have to think about this and get back to you. I need to go look and see. I mean, a couple came to mind. Immediately comes to mind Things Fall Apart by Chinya Achebe. It's a classic that I'm embarrassed not to have read yet. I'm not embarrassed not to have read anything. Obviously, read whatever you want. And classics are not my thing as far as like traditional classics. I actually feel like this one could have counted because I definitely consider like modern classics and classics from the 1900s to be classics. Another book that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head is Oh Pioneers by Willa Cather, because that's one that I have been wanting to read. Two that I definitely have in mind is Oh Pioneers and Things Fall Apart. Let me look at my shelves. I picked out a couple. Things Fall Apart, Possibility. I don't know why I'm so reluctant to read this, and at the same time I want to read this so much. Ugh, I don't know. It just seems so heavy. I also picked up Thousand Cranes by Yasunori Kawabata. I've read Yasunori Kawabata and really enjoyed it. And this is one that I keep saying I'm going to pick up, which probably this is the most embarrassing because I've literally put this on like 10 book lists that I wanted to read. So I should definitely pick this one up. I am not embarrassed not to have read this, but I would love to read an Ellen Larson. I've only read Passing. I have read Passing twice, but I don't think that's the one for today. The Color Purple by Alice Walker caught my eye. I know Alice Walker is a controversial author, but I do really like her writing style and I like her work, and I have always wanted to read this queer classic. Looking through it too, I didn't realize that it's an epistolary novel and it's all told in letters to God, it looks like, and it's like very short. So I don't know. It's really between these two. I think I need to read a page of each of them and then decide. So when I start reading one of either of these books, I will come back to you. Actually, let's watch the end of Jill's video and see what she picks and see if there's any other surprises from the spin. Okay, so she did the same thing that I'm doing and picked two books and then is going to decide off camera which ones, but obviously I'm going to come back to you and decide. So I'll see you then. So I decided to go with Thousand Cranes by Yasunori Kawabata because this best fits the prompt, which is to read a book that read a classic that you're embarrassed not to have read yet. Now, a reminder is just that you should never be embarrassed not to have read a book. This is just a game. It's just in fun. It's just a joke. It's not that I'm actually embarrassed that I haven't read this, but I have been putting this on so many lists and I have wanted to read it for so long, and so it fits the prompt of being like embarrassed that I haven't read it. And it just goes to show you too that DNFing books is good, not picking up books is good, ignoring your TBR is good, ignoring your pile of possibilities is good, because all the other times that I've put this on a list, or all the other times that I've tried to pick this book up, I haven't been able to get into it. And if I had tried to force myself to read during that time, to read this particular book, then I probably wouldn't have liked it, or I would have DNF'd it and not gone back to it, or I would have had some sort of like bad feelings revolving around this book. But this was the right time for me to pick it up. It just so happened that putting it on the spin list, deciding between several different books, and then reading a page or two of this one, I'm really, really into it. I'm more than halfway through already. It's very short. It's only 144 pages. I have already ruined this mass market paperback, unfortunately, but I like my mass market paperbacks like that anyway. So I have read Snow Country by Kawabata before, and I think that this follows some similar themes. He was a contemporary writer writing modern classics in the early 1900s in Japan. This book I think was written in the 1958. So post-war, which is interesting. This book follows a young man, Kikuji, who has recently lost his father and then pretty soon after that lost his mother as well. When we first meet him, he's going to a tea house for a tea ceremony that is put on by his father's mistress, one of his father's mistresses. So she has often invited him to a tea ceremony before, but this time he's intrigued because she says that there's a young woman that he should meet and perhaps get engaged to, perhaps marry at the tea ceremony. So he decides, against his better judgment, to go. He has like a ton of resentment for this person because she was a mistress to his father, because she was, I guess, the first time when he was a child that he realized that his father was going to have mistresses. And then their affair was fairly brief, and his father went on to have affairs with other people. This woman putting on the tea ceremony stayed in the family's life, and Kikuji is resentful of her because she like befriended his mother, and they kind of formed an alliance against his father's later mistress, Mrs. Ota. Kikuji's very wary of this whole situation, but he goes and he sees this woman that might be a good potential marriage match for him, but his father's second mistress, Mrs. Ota, and her daughter are also at the tea ceremony, and this kind of sparks a whole resurgence of emotions and feelings for Kikuji, and also a chain of events that leads Kikuji to becoming involved again with his father's mistresses. So that's all I kind of want to say, because again, it's like a really short book, so I don't want to get too much more into the plot. There's definitely some moments that are like surprising, shocking, and I remember from reading Snow Country that there's quite a bit of sex in these, but no sex scenes, definitely closed doors. Not only that though, they're very ambiguous sex scenes. Like, yes, they obviously have had sex, the people involved, but there's no like real mention of them having sex. It's just kind of implied that they had sex, which you get from the implications, but it's a little bit confusing to read as a modern Western reader. Some of the themes in this and Snow Country are similar in the idea of like manhood and how you learn to be a man, what you take away from being a man, how you treat women as a man. And although I'm sure Yasunari was not writing this from a feminist lens, or was not writing this from a lens of this is what you shouldn't do as a man to women, a lot of times his stories do come off that way. The way that Kikuji and his other main characters think about how they're treating women is obviously from a Western lens with regret and dismay, even though they continue to abuse or neglect or overlook the women in their lives. But I think from a Western lens, you definitely look at it as a cautionary tale, and that often the fates that befall these people or the trials and tribulations that they go through are, to my mind, are obviously against the way that the characters act in the book. So I really like this one. It's definitely very wrapped up in the idea of the tea ceremony, and it has a lot of reference to tea paraphernalia, tea ceremony, various poets or tea masters, and there's little footnotes at the bottom that kind of let you in on what some of those things are, which is nice. This is an old copy. It doesn't even say who the translator is, so I'm gonna have to try and figure that out and look it up. It doesn't say in the beginning, does it? I don't think so. It does have a note about the tea ceremony in the beginning, which I didn't read, but I do plan on reading afterwards. No, it doesn't even say who translated it. What a shame. But I love this cover and I love this book, and I'm excited to read the rest. And like I said, I'm just super happy that I was able to come to this book at the right time, and I was able to read it and enjoy it rather than continue to have it languish on my shelves, but also rather than to read it and not enjoy it because I was forcing myself to read it. I do think that the cadence, the language, the depiction of the story is very sparse, very not American, not English, not Western. So if you're not used to writing like that, you might have a hard time getting into it, but I think you don't need to know every single reference, and you don't need to know every single minute of the events that happen. If you just kind of go with the flow and get into the flow of this book, you will enjoy it. When I finish Thousand Cranes, we will come back and I don't know, will we pick the next book for January 2025, because this is our December book for 2024, or will that be another video? I don't know. We're gonna find out together. is January 19th, and I have finished Thousand Cranes by Yasunori Kawabata. I actually finished this a little while ago, and I needed some time to sit with it. I'm so glad that I read it. I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoy Kawabata's writing, and I like the kind of nebulous style, the way that it's written. I like that they're both very sexy, but they're not sexual in that you're not seeing explicit sex scenes, but there is a lot of obsession with sex, with bodies. But at the heart of these novels, I think it's about the relationship between men and women, and how, like I kind of said before, men don't treat women right, and it is detrimental to their person, to their being. So the men think that they are totally justified and in the right to be able to treat women the way that they do, and to be able to toy with their emotions, to be able to play with them. But in the end, the only person, well, not the only person, it hurts the women, but it also hurts the men, and they never make full and real connections with anyone, not even these women that they are so close to and that they are kind of obsessed with. And this reminds me a little bit of West of the Border, East of the Sun. I think that's what it's called. The only, wait, who was it? The only Murakami that I've read. And the only Murakami I'm probably going to read. I don't really see myself reading more of his work. It was fine. It was interesting. And I feel similarly that people would say that Yasunori Kawabata was very misogynist and hated women, and I don't think that's the case, but I think his indifference, or his character's indifference to women, and his character's willingness to exploit women is very obvious in these books, whereas I did not feel that way about Murakami. Thousand Cranes was interesting. Ultimately, again, it was like how our main character was not willing to accept help or interference from the women in his life, who happened to be women who were also in his father's life. And I think it had to do with that pride of his being his downfall. Now, some of these women were not cool, some of them were not nice, some of them were manipulating things for their own means, but there were also quite a few women that got whirled into these problems that really didn't deserve the treatment that they were given, both by the other women and by our main character as well. So I'm really glad that I read this. I definitely plan on reading more Kawabata, and I just really love to read modern classics from Japan. I think at the moment I like modern classics from Japan more than I like contemporary books. I'm currently also reading Days at the Murasaki Bookshop, and like this one is just feeling very heavy-handed, very twee, very saccharine in the lessons that it's giving, whereas this one feels more complex, more interesting, and more thought-provoking. Like you have to think about it more to make your own conclusions about what this author might be trying to say and what this story's kind of message is, which I really enjoy. I'm looking forward to reading some Osamu Dazai, which I have one book of his. I'm looking forward to reading any other Japanese books, modern classics, when I get my hands on them. This was my December book for the TBR Spin 2024, which means that we have officially concluded the TBR Spin 2024, which is so exciting. And not even that far behind. I think it's interesting because both Jill and Sarah talked about how they were behind and how a lot of people were behind this round, and I felt like I was going to be like the most behind, but it's only the middle of January and I finished reading all of the books for 2024, which is very exciting. Now, normally in these vlogs, what I would go ahead and do is look at the January spin, look at Sarah's video, watch the spin, and pick a new book, show you my stack and all those things. But because this video had 2 books in it, it's going to be quite long. Also, I showed you my stack in the last video, so my October pick, which was Night of the Living Res, I actually picked out my new stack for 2025. So if you want to see a preview of that, go ahead and go back and watch that video. And then what I'm going to do is in the next video, which will be January 2025's TBR Spin, I will watch the spin, show you my stack, watch the spin, read my book, and then pick a new book at the end, and we'll start again fresh. Let me know if you participated in the TBR Spin 2024. Let me know if you were behind, let me know if you caught up, let me know if you're still working on it, or if when the end of the year rolls around you just give up. Let me know if you're participating in the TBR Spin 2025. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!